This is kind of a selfish question, but I figured someone who's as knowledgeable about the history of sports as you are might appreciate this. So the four major sports leagues, the NBA, NFL, NHL, MLB. What's like your favorite random fact from each one of those leagues? Putting you on the spot here, I know.
All right. Baseball was the first big. It's the oldest league of the four. Back to the 19th century, uh, and there's not much that's really random that's about it, except for the fact that once they said that once the Dodgers and Giants moved west, there was a very big reluctance to put more teams in, but the New York wanting to get back in the National League is what forced expansion. So basically, the birth of the Mets changed basically how baseball was run. So that's always interesting. Of course, you have the years of segregation in baseball, which were kind of unfortunate. They're trying to integrate the stats in now, but I think they're kind of going at it the wrong way. I think you do it because it's kind of weird because I don't even know if the numbers are complete for some of these things. I mean, I think Satchel Paige probably could have won as many games as Cy Young if he had a fair chance. But that will be never known, and that I think that fact that you would never fully know has to be part of the story. Um, the NFL was founded in a car dealership in 1920 in Canton, Ohio. Was originally the American Association for Professional Football. Um, the oldest teams are the Chicago Cardinals, who moved to St. Louis and then Arizona. Then you had the Decatur Staleys, who became the Chicago Bears, and of course the Green Bay Packers. But many of the original teams linked into baseball. So the New York Giants named themselves after the baseball team. The Detroit Lions went to the Lions because they wanted to have a feline name to go hand in hand with the Tigers. The Cubs, Bears. We had that connection because a bear sounds tougher than a cub, so you had to be calling the Bears. The Pittsburgh Steelers were one time the Pittsburgh Pirates. There once was a Brooklyn Dodgers minor NFL team. The Of course, the Chicago Cardinals moved to St. Louis, and they were playing at the same time as the St. Louis Cardinals. So you had like a lot of connections to try to draw fans from baseball in the early years.
Huh.
Hockey, you only had six teams for a 25-year stretch, and then we're going to 1967. The league expanded from 6 to 12 teams. There were a bunch of teams that didn't make it out of the depression, including the New York Americans, who basically got evicted from Madison Square Garden by the Rangers. Tried to build an arena in Brooklyn, but the war came, so they had to put themselves on hiatus. And then they wanted to start back up, and the Rangers blocked it. So you only had six teams for a 25-year stretch from 42 to 67, and then the league doubled to 12 teams. And in 1967, the Montreal Canadiens had the most Stanley Cup championships, 14. The Maple Leafs were right behind them with 13 championships, winning their 13th championship in 1967. The Maple Leafs have not been back to the Stanley Cup Finals since.
And I think they had that drought too, right? Where they didn't win a playoff series in however long. I
20
forget the
years.
20 years, yeah.
19 years. 19 years. They didn't win a playoff series between 2004 and 2023.
Yeah.
And they've only
Yeah.
won one playoff series since 2004.
Yeah, when they beat Tampa last year. I remember that because everybody was celebrating that they finally won a playoff series.
Yeah, so it's been a quite a dry spell for Toronto, and they are basically the heart of Canada. I mean, Montreal is French Canada, but they act like the Yankees. They're basically Canada's team because they're hyped up like the Cowboys, and yet they just choke every year.
Yeah, I was about to say, I heard someone say that they're Cowboys of the NHL, and I haven't been able to get
Uh,
that out of my head
the
since.
NBA, it. I've always just looked at that 8 year stretch, 11 and 13, 8 straight years that the Celtics won championships, as just being wow.
Speaking of, I know we talked about, the old years. I mean, people always say, well, the Celtics won most of their championships, way back when. Do you think that there's any credibility to that?
No, you either won a championship or you didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only thing that got erased is football. Football, they have pre Super Bowl and post Super Bowl, and a lot of people don't realize that there was a history before the Super Bowl. Like the Cleveland Browns were a dominant team. They played in a league called the All American Football Conference, won the championship 4 straight seasons, and put the league out of business because they were so dominant that the NFL absorbed 3 teams from the AAFC. One was the Browns. One was a Colts team that was a precursor to the current Colts team. Do you know who the third team is?
Couldn't tell you.
Really?
The Colts, the Browns.
Who's the third AAFC team? They still exist.
AFC.
They were in the AAFC and joined the NFL in 1950.
Give me a hint.
I will give it away.
I don't know. I'm drawing a blank.
You are going to kick yourself.
The 49ers?
It is the 49ers.
Look at that. See, that's the extent of my sports history, Frank. This is why I wanted to have you on, so you could teach me some things.
Yep, it is the 49ers. And so everyone thought, oh, the Browns, yeah, you won that league. The AAFC won it all 4 years the league existed. So, week 1, 1950 season, Browns' first NFL game, they have to play the 2-time defending NFL champion, Philadelphia Eagles, and they kicked the Eagles' ass. The Browns end up going to the NFL championship game in each of their first 6 years in the NFL. And won 2 championships. In 50 and again in 54. And they went to the NFL championship game again in 57. So 7 of their first 8 years in the NFL, they were in the NFL championship game and won 2 championships. Lost to the Rams in 51. And lost 3 times to the Detroit Lions.
So you're telling me the Browns aren't as sorry of a franchise as I thought, because post Super Bowl era, it's been rough for the Brownies.
The year before the Super Bowl started, the last year before the Super Bowl started, well, actually no, the Packers won that year. 2 years before the Super Bowl started. 64, the Browns also won a championship.
There you go. Browns fans, you didn't have it that bad. You had some success in, it sounds like the 50s, the 60s.
Yeah, they had, the 70s were kind of a dry decade for them. They went to a couple of NFL championship games at the end of the 60s. They lost to the Colts on the way to Super Bowl III. They lost to the Vikings on the way to Super Bowl IV. Then they didn't win another playoff game until 86, and they went to the AFC Championship game in the 80s 3 times in 4 years.
Wow. Who, NFL-wise, I mean, when you think of historic franchise, obviously the Packers, are up there. Who's at the top for you?
The Packers are the Packers have had a dry spell too.
That's right, they have.
They had a pretty bad dry spell from 67 until 92. Well, they only made the playoffs twice in that period. That's between Super Bowl II and Super Bowl 27. They only made the playoffs twice in that stretch. And one of those years was a strike year. So the Packers had a pretty rough 70s, 80s. Here's something that you may not know. Prior to the Super Bowl, there was one team that never won an NFL championship game, except for the 49ers. Don't count the 49ers. 49ers were only existed from 1950. There was one NFL team that existed prior to 1950, never played an NFL championship game prior to the Super Bowl.
I'm thinking. Prior to 1950, never played an NFL championship game.
In fact, they came into the league in 1932, and between 32 and 69, they had maybe 4 or 5 winning seasons.
Okay, so early team. Huh.
That was the absolute doormat of the NFL for a better part of 40 years. In fact, they finally won a playoff game in 1972. It was their first ever. It was their 40th season, and they won a playoff game in 1972 for the first time.
The Dolphins.
No, Dolphins. Dolphins didn't exist until 66.
That's right. Okay. Huh. I don't know. Who is it?
The Pittsburgh Steelers.
Wow. Would never have guessed that. The Pittsburgh Steelers. So it took them 40 years to win one playoff game.
Yeah.
Wow.
In fact, that's why they moved. That's why they were moved from the NFC to from the NFL to the AFC when the two leagues merged, and they evened the leagues out to 13 teams apiece. Because at the time when the merger finally came through, there were 16 NFL teams and 10 AFL teams. So in 70, when the full merger was put through, they had to move 3 teams from the NFC to what would have been the NFC to the AFC. And the Steelers were one of the worst teams year in, year out. In fact, 1969, they went 1-13.
Have you told Jerry this? Is he aware?
I'm not sure if he's aware of it.
Of his team's history. Frank, you need to enlighten Jerry about the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, well, it actually ended up turning out for them really well because things started turning around because they had the number 1 overall pick in 1970 and chose Terry Bradshaw.